evening. Welcome to the second edition of The World Tonight. I'm your host, Peter Capote, along with my fellow co-host, Adam Lawless. Tonight we have a very packed show, and the first item on tonight's show starts in Africa, and it's with Mali's coup. Over to Adam to explain it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So the base headline for this is that the military have arrested the president of Mali, where they have forced him to resign, much to international condemnation. But before we can jump a bit into this, we need to look back to 2012, where there was another, or I guess back then was a coup, which forced out that government and forced out that current president into exile. Now, in the wake of that, jihadists took over a lot of the northern parts of the country where there was a bit of a power vacuum. And in the wake of all of this, new elections were called, and this current president, who is now ousted, Mr. President Keita, has had to fill in or try and solve the issue that had basically been created in his wake. However, during his tenure from 2013 to now, he hasn't really been able to do this. Not only have the jihadists in the north been able to entrench themselves, creating a massive issue for the stability of the country, but also allegations of corruption and cronyism came flowing in. I mean, one of the first things the president did was buy a private jet so he could fly around the world. So there is a lot there that led to a bunch of unrest. And out of this unrest and the fact the country was basically falling apart, an opposition movement rose up and was marching on the streets for a considerable amount of time, demanding his resignation. And he didn't resign. And so, to gain some form of stability back to the country, the military have arrested him and hope to call new elections. Again, there's some major issues with this now. Not only does the ousting of a president remove any form of legitimacy to a leader, it further creates this power vacuum in the north. And just to briefly go over, there have been lots of international condemnations to this arrest because it affects other states around Mali, because it creates this power vacuum. So yeah, basically, the president's been arrested. It's creating instability. The international community is condemning it, and yeah, there's not much else to say about it. Do you have any comments, Peter?
Yeah, I think it was a good analysis. Obviously, with Mali, I think it was in 2012, the French went in the last time because of the unrest that was happening with jihadists. Has there been any reactions from the French government about this coup in any way or form?
So it's much in line with the international community, as in, the military can't just rise up and take out a leader. This current president had a lot to thank for the French, not only because he was really the only one holding these jihadists back from actually attacking the capital of Mali, but it does seem like the actual future of Mali's, I guess, leadership, country as a whole, really, is quite unstable.
Yeah, I mean, that area of Africa, very interestingly, has always had the notorious reputation of being unstable, but in recent years has really started to get a stability complex. So it's interesting, I think, now to see what will happen with Mali if it has a ripple effect throughout the region.
Fantastic, and it seems like you have some news for us coming from Libya. So would you like to?
Yes. So Libya, for those who may not be aware, has been in a very long civil war since the ousting of Muammar Gaddafi, and there have been two groups fighting each other for control, all of which are backed by different powers. The first one is the Libyan House of Representatives, which is supported by Russia and Sudan and Syria. More or less, this is one off group that has been fighting a more rauntageous battle. And then there's the government of the National Accord, which is based in Tripoli. And just a correction, the House of Representatives is based in Tobruk. The House, the National Accord government, is supported by the United States and the West, along with, very importantly this week, Egypt. And Egypt, in particular, has been threatening for a very long time to go in to Libya. And apologies, my sore throat, settle the unrest that has been happening. And after weeks of threatening, and President Sisi of Egypt threatening an assault, a ceasefire was declared earlier this week between the two sides, which is very important, as this is the first time since Gaddafi's fall that there is not guns and bullets firing off across Libya. And hopefully, because of the pressure of the Egyptians, an international solution can be solved to this, and have these two, which the two are basically fighting over, the landmass. I mean, most of Libya is controlled by the National Accord, with the other front being the House of Representatives, more near the far eastern side of the country. So it's interesting to see if this will finally end the fighting in that sense, officially.
Yeah, and it's quite important because there really hasn't been any fighting in Libya since about June time. So this definitely does seem to be a bit of a, I think the BBC quoted it as a calculated truce.
Yes.
So yeah, definitely. And just to your point, talking about where they're based, a bit of setting the scene. The current, you say, House of Representatives side, controls lots of the oil fields in the country. So there's a lot of tension there. But yeah.
Yeah, they control the oil, and the government of the National Accord controls the major cities. So that's very contentious thing. Speaking of Libya and the African region, Adam also has a special report on the disturbing rise again of ISIS in the African hemisphere. Adam?
Yes, this is quite concerning because we really haven't heard anything about ISIS since their downfall in Syria. But to briefly go over, there was the two major regions, or two major countries where ISIS are currently resurgent is Mozambique, where recently they seized a major port, which is quite important for international trade in the region. And ultimately, what we're seeing here is a lot of very weak states being, I guess, having these power vacuums with them, just like, as I was referring to, with Mali in the north, jihadists seizing this power vacuum and using it to sort of force themselves in. They're not really there to build any form of government or stability. You hear stories and reports of them going in, murdering entirety of villages, and then going back out. So yeah, it definitely is very concerning. But I just would like to go in for a sec about why they seem to be resurgent in Africa specifically. So one of the main things is they are, as I said, weak states. They have weak institutions, very little legitimacy from the people, and so they're able to utilize this to get out of that. They also have poor security forces, very poor enforcement of the rule of law, poor intelligence services. So that ability to really combat terrorism is really damaged. And yeah, as I was saying, people lack a legitimate way to voice their dissent, especially in dictatorships. So when people want to voice some kind of, I guess, grievance, their only real way to actually to get it out is to join these groups, and this is what ISIS is exploiting. So yeah, it's really concerning. Yeah.
And with that, obviously, Africa has already had Al-Shabaab, which is already a very powerful group. What has been the effect with ISIS growing on Al-Shabaab? Do they see them as an ally or as a threat to their hegemony as a terror group in Africa?
So I don't know too many specifics on the actual workings. However, just looking at the composition of these forces, it doesn't really seem like, and just say I have, my knowledge on this isn't the best specifically, but it definitely does seem like the actual people who are fighting in these places, like Mozambique, seizing these towns, these villages, these ports, aren't actually from Mozambique. So while, as I was saying, people are trying to voice concerns, a lot of them are coming in from Somalia.
Mm-hmm.
They're coming in from Kenya. So really, I think what these these varying groups, they ultimately have a very common aim. So it definitely does seem like they're exploiting their reach in other countries to try and assist different groups with backings in other regions.
That's absolutely correct, and I think that's a very interesting point about a lot of these ISIS fighters are not from Africa, but many parts of the Middle East where they've been routed out by coalition forces throughout the thing. So I think it's very interesting. On a different note, a more maybe lighter note, we now go to New Zealand, which is its election on the request of so the backstory here, for those who may not be aware, New Zealand was supposed to have an election next month in September. However, due to an increase in COVID cases and Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters, who is in the coalition with Jacinda Ardern, Labour government, asking for a delay of the election, which was granted, New Zealand now will wait another month to go to the polls. And Adam, who does work with Oceania Elect, can explain more about the election itself. Adam.
Yes, so this election being delayed really isn't the best for the Labour Party. Ultimately, right now, they're doing incredibly well. Nothing like New Zealand has really seen with their mixed member proportional system. And so they're about 55 to 60% in the polls, completely massive for any, I guess, parliamentary democracy. Mm-hmm. You have the National Party, which is usually, vying neck and neck, who actually, got the popular vote and more seats in the last election, going down to 27% or even lower in some cases. So, yeah, this is pretty major for them to finally have some more time to hopefully allow the coronavirus cases to pass over so they can get out and start campaigning more and more. Just to talk about some of the other parties and how they're reacting to this, New Zealand First, who is in a coalition with the Labour Party, is struggling a lot. They, I think, got about 7% in the last election and are now polling at 1%. So their decline is definitely being felt, I guess, sort of like the Liberal Democrats in the UK after they joined coalition. They usually have this. They've experienced it before. But yeah, again, other parties are saying that this is what they want, because ultimately this is the crucial time they need for campaigning, where Labour just seems so dominant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think to ask along on that, obviously the Nationals have had a poison chalice of leadership. 3 different leaders now in 1 calendar year. What for them is the key of having at least a decent result? Whether it seems more unlikely they won't win, but maintaining themselves in a decent opposition standing so they don't fall off miserably.
Yeah, so the real test for them is going to be trying to fight against the classical Liberal Party ACT. They're sort of the real only big right-wing party in New Zealand. And so they're losing a lot of votes to ACT, where, a lot of the traditional national voters are going, well, this seems so pointless, let's try something different. And so I think the best result for them is definitely going to be trying to consolidate their base, so that ultimately, when a future election gets called, they're able to, create themselves as a true opposition, a united opposition, and hopefully push themselves up. But it is going to be an uphill battle for them, especially in the future.
And on the other 2 parties, you mentioned New Zealand First, which went into coalition with Labour against, at the last time, a very controversial agreement, as many in the National Party felt that New Zealand First was more in line with them politically. How has it been for for Winston Peters and his party to be polling at 7% and almost now on the verge of having nothing possibly come the next Parliament?
He is completely used to this, I imagine. The previous coalition government they joined, which was with National, they saw a very similar defeat. I think Winston Peters himself lost his own seat after being in coalition. So despite the fact they seem to really treasure this kingmaker role they have, it never works out for them when they actually get into get past a normal government.
Mhm. So the traditional, I forget this phrase, the junior party always gets the blame for any unpopular decision the main party does.
I
Uh,
guess I was
yeah,
just going to say quickly, I guess it's less in this case them
yeah.
getting any blame because
Mhm.
people see this government as incredible. It's more people
Yeah.
going, well, they're not doing, they're not the face of it.
Yeah.
Labour is. So they're
Mhm.
just positioning their votes there.
And lastly, on the Greens, who seem to be having an interesting thing with Labour up significantly. What do you think for the Greens it is? They're not in coalition, but they are a natural partner should Labour possibly maybe fall short in a scenario for government.
Mhm.
How is this election shaping up for them?
So again, so they're in a supply and agreement
Yeah.
kind of deal with Labour at the moment. So yeah, definitely, if Labour is looking short, they're pretty much going to back them because ultimately it's going to do the best for the country. But they're having this really big issue where a lot of their centre-left votes are just going straight to Labour. Again, it's the issue with New Zealand First. People are going, what is the point of voting for this party when we have Ardern and her spectacular approval ratings?
Mm-hmm.
Why not go straight for her? So it's definitely there. That's their main issue, is trying to create themselves as a very different party to Labour. To go, we're still a progressive party. Look at what Ardern has done in terms of immigration and so forth. So, yeah.
Yeah, and mentioning Ardern, obviously very popular, widely praised for her handling with coronavirus. Obviously, before this crisis had happened, she was neck and neck in the polls with the Nationals because of scandals involving, her budget and whatnot, and other ethics. What for her in a year, in a bit of it's been a turnaround since the fall after the Christchurch surge. For her is what can she do to maintain her, high based approval that she's currently having?
I think, we're in this election period right now where it's
Yeah.
talking about everything you've done before. And she's been doing that. She's been, talking about all the bills she's passed, all the jobs she's created and so forth, and especially that coronavirus response. Obviously, this sudden, I guess, rise in cases, I believe it was only 9 or so, is definitely, may hurt that image. But ultimately, I feel a lot of people are seeing how other countries have reacted and responded, and seeing how they failed, and looking at how better, I guess, their government has been. So I feel people really could appreciate that. So yeah, she has to she's going to be repeating those main messages, and it looks like it's really working.
Yeah, she could be on task to win a majority government, which no one has done in New Zealand since they changed to proportional representation in the 90s. The last party I'll ask is the ACT Act, which is in a bit of a surge right now in the polls. They had a miserable 2017 election at the last one. What really has been, the sparking plug for the resurgence? Obviously, the Nationals, being in a bit of a chaotic state obviously helps, but what else in your mind has allowed them to return to prominence?
So I think it's partly national, it's partly New Zealand First. I see what they have currently as being a bit temporary. It depends how much National are able to campaign with their new leader. When people see, I'm just going to be repeating the same points. I don't think there's anything too unique besides people looking for a new party to go towards, something right wing, something different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely. And then lastly, for Judith Collins, who is now the Nationals leader, who was given the job after Todd Muller resigned. What for her, is the job, the road ahead? She obviously has taken over a party that is very demoralized right now and very wounded over internal struggles and struggling with the Ardern government.
Yeah, so as it was mentioned before, really what she needs to do is try and consolidate her base, make sure her defeat isn't too spectacular, and keep it going, really, because I don't really see anything changing in a month. maybe a new crisis comes along, which they're going to be able to exploit. But until then, it does just seem a bit of a free fall.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Good analysis. To another country in that part of the world, that is Japan. Shinzo Abe earlier this week was hospitalized with his chronic condition that he has suffered for some time. Obviously, for those who may not be aware, Shinzo Abe is one of the longest current serving leaders in the world. He's been Prime Minister of Japan twice, from 2006 to 2007 and from 2012 to the present. Abe, of course, is very much a powerful figure, not just in Japan, but for the West as well, as he's tried to align himself very keenly with Western powers. And go over to a moment, Brad, we'll talk about, certain rumblings within Japan about a possible election or party mergers. But it should be noted that Shinzo Abe did put this year, 3 years ago, as his deadline to reform the constitution of Japan. Which, for those who may not know, Japan's current constitution has a clause put in by the United States after World War II, which is a pacifism. I believe it's Article 9.
Yep.
Which says Japan cannot go to war unless attacked or in self-defense. Now, Abe, for the last decade, has been running against that Article 9. He wants to get rid of it. He wants Japan to be able to, in a sense, do as it sees fit if it needs to defend, for example, the United States or any other regional ally, as he sees the region in a very dangerous state, where Japan, being arguably the U.S. and the West's closest ally in the region, as a bit of a protective help. I'll go now to Adam, who will explain more about a possible election and opposition rumblings.
So yes, the main thing to talk about is Japan rarely has a term fully completed with its national diet. So, early elections are usually called quite often, but it seems like the current ruling party, the LDP, are aiming for a January election. And what this is going to be trying to do is reconsolidate some of the power that they feel like they lost in the 2019, I'm trying to remember its name now, I think it's House of Councillors election, which is their upper chamber, where they were trying to aim for this 2/3 majority to, repeal this, to change this Article 9 to make it, to ensure that they can take away this pacifist stance. But ultimately they fell short. They actually lost seats. And yes, they're trying to sort of regain some of that, some support. And ultimately, the LDP have a lot of support in Japan. It's very difficult to state how much people, or how many people center their political allegiances around it. So, for example, in Japan, they don't do normal party support polls. They do party identification polls. This is how people relate to a party. Go, I support that. Traditionally, a lot of people don't support any party. I think it's about half usually. But the party that always is 30 points ahead, 40 points ahead is the LDP. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they have this time where things are looking quite bad domestically as people are disapproving of their coronavirus response. They want to have a time where they can, focus on the positives, boost themselves up, hopefully get something positive in an election result. But as you were mentioning earlier, the opposition have been quietly scheming in the background. So two major opposition parties, the Constitutional Democratic Party and the, I'm trying to remember its name now, Democratic for the People Party, have, I think, confirmed, or at least the DPP have confirmed, a merger together of these two opposition parties, not just an alliance where they say, oh, I'll stand down there and so forth. Mm-hmm. It's a unified manifesto, unified message together. So the DPP have recently agreed to this, and the hope is that with a unified party, they're going to be able to actually dethrone the LDP, or at least get somewhere where they seem like a genuine opposition. So yeah, there's the major things in terms of an election front. But I did just want to ask quickly, what do you think is the future for the LDP post Shinzo Abe?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. In terms, I think because Abe, has been very successful, in his premiership. The LDP has been a very successful party, but it hasn't had long-term, leaders. Japan used to be joked the Italy of Asia, with different leaders coming and going every year. Abe, to his credit, has consolidated not just the country but his party. He has made himself very, popular in the base, and really doesn't have a natural rival. And I think this is really his strength at the current moment. He doesn't have someone who would be seen as the future, but I do think the future of the party itself really will be interesting. About should Abe probably win his next election, which will probably be his last? Can he get that last thing he's always wanted? Because if he gets his Article 9, there's a very high chance Abe will probably leave the moment that passes, as that's really been his, main political goal. He's restored Japan's economic confidence when he took over after the tsunami, and he's, intruded more powers, across Japanese regions. But yeah, I think the big key now for him is, one more push, which is to get that. And I think, in his current cabinet, if I had to predict, I'm not, of course, very as astute with Japanese politics, but I would say probably someone, younger, probably fresher image, who maybe is a loyalist to Abe, will probably be the future of the party. But I think overall the LDP is always very good at planning ahead of things. I think they're one of the last parties in the world that can easily be said the word dominance and expectation of winning is more of a given, not, and that's not a hope.
Yeah. And just to, if I can for a few minutes, just about some potential successors. Yeah. There's a variety, but the majority of them are, his traditional older members who have been in his cabinet a while, have a lot of party backing, very popular people outside of just, normal LDP, I guess, party halls or whatever. They're genuinely popular amongst the people. But there is definitely a rumblings of a third candidate to the two. I'm trying to remember the name down. I've written down. So excuse the pronunciations. Taro Kano, who is the current Minister of Defense, seen as the leader at the moment in terms of possible successors. He's very popular, part of the second biggest faction within the LDP, definitely there. And then you have Toshimitsu Motegi, who is the current foreign minister. The third largest faction, is very, very close to Abe, who has kept him since, in these high-ranking roles for a very, very long time. Only issue for him is he doesn't really have any support outside of the LDP. Doesn't have that name recognition. But finally, these two other candidates, one is 57, one is 64. Another potential is, this name, Koizumi, I think is the surname. Anyway, this individual entirely depends on how long Abe sticks around. He is currently only 39, doesn't have much cabinet experience, but he's definitely seen as a newcomer to the race. So just an individual to keep an eye on if you're interested in Japanese politics. Really isn't. I'm going to say definitely probably doesn't have a chance, but maybe in the future if they lead on. But he's definitely that younger character some may be looking for in their LDP leader.
Yeah, and I think the key thing you mentioned is, a lot of that cabinet are a lot of, Abe loyalists from the long haul. His deputy prime minister, Taro Aso, if I apologize, is 78. A long time, man, seen as Abe's, right-hand man inside the party. And yeah, as you mentioned, a lot of them are old, but, it will be interesting. The two names you mentioned, good grief, I'm forgetting one of the names already. Defense minister's name. Tasawi Iwawa.
Just refer to their, I guess, roles.
As you mentioned, it has been seen more over the time as, someone who Abe likes and trusts. And if he is the one to get Article 9, again, Article 9 is a big thing with Abe. through that may very well be, what gets him possibly Abe's, right hand endorsement, being this is the person who got my long-term goal done, and they should be rewarded with my job should I decide to leave.
Yeah. Well, that's the contrast there. Just not to correct you, but I guess his right-hand man, I think, is the current foreign minister. Unless I'm getting things wrong here, but
I think
that's
the right-hand men. I think.
Yeah. But that's basically the divide at the moment. Is does he give it to the person he's been so close to, or does he give it to the person who delivers, or possibly delivers his dream? Yeah, it's really interesting. So I guess that's the issue with Japanese politics, is that there isn't really an opposition to look to. You're having to look individually within the LDP to see where the successes could come from.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's very fascinating to have that very old school politics that in many countries doesn't exist anymore.
Especially from a democratic system as well.
Yeah, it's a very democratic system where basically it's a hierarchy to get to the top, and you have to wait your time. It's not it's famous to quote the British Conservative Party, which is infamous for replacing leaders when it sees time to see when their poll numbers go down. Now, speaking of Europe, we now move to that fun subject. We're going to mention now Belarus, and Adam has some reports this week about Russia finally commenting more on the situation. Adam.
Yes. So again, just to give people a bit of a reminder on the situation here, I think it was on the 9th of August, an election took place in Belarus, which had a very strong grassroots campaign from an opposition candidate who seems to, if we're looking at the results that are said to have been untampered, have won overwhelmingly. And in response, we've had general strikes, people marching on the streets, police officers and soldiers lowering their weapons in support. And now, most recently, we've had Lukashenko, the current president, dictator of Belarus, saying that he will come out and support new elections if a new constitution is delivered. And along with this, we have had Putin grandstanding on the border of Belarus, saying that he supports Lukashenko and will not abide by the West, trying to increase their influence into what is really his backyard.
Yeah, and with Putin, that's always an interesting character to look at. With this being realistically Russia's last backyard of influence, how much do you think for Putin this is critical for him not to fall fully to Western ideas, and also he may not be very fond of Lukashenko, but to basically show himself as a strong man willing to allow Russia not to be tampered around with by Europe or the US, etc.
So, he certainly has an interesting response to it, and one that I don't really understand that much, because ultimately what I'm seeing from Belarus is you have a failed dictator, a man who was on his last legs, who has had the entirety of his country come out against him, where ultimately he could have, quietly said to him in the back room, step down, I will bring, in these free new elections, I could bring in somebody who's pro-Russia, because we have really no idea the actual, ideological breakdown of these protesters, because ultimately it's an corruption issue. Sure. So, from Putin's response, I don't entirely get it myself, but ultimately, there is definitely the dangerous possibility of getting somebody who is, pro-EU, as we've seen. The opposition candidate is currently residing in Lithuania, has their entire support, has the EU's backing, has the West backing. So, definitely going to be an interesting one to look out for, especially considering this proposed new elections with a new constitution. I don't entirely know how free they're going to be considered, especially because it just seems like it's delaying the inevitable. Ultimately, it just seems like if new elections are declared and Lukashenko stays on and he wins, it's definitely going to seem very suspicious. So, protests are still continuing. General strikes are still continuing. Yes, they're a bit diminished. Yes, the police are being a bit more repressive now. But ultimately, the spirit is definitely still there, despite it being about a week and a bit now. So,
well, yeah, Yeah, I think I agree on those points. I also think as mentioned, it's the last real dictatorship of Europe, and with that, I think people are going to take their time. I think a lot of Belarusians who don't like Lukashenko realize it's not going to happen overnight, because you're going to have
Yeah,
to keep protesting and protesting. I mean, a great example of this is what their neighbors in the 80s did: Poland and the three Baltic states, Romania, etc. It took time. I mean, in Poland's case, it took almost a decade of protesting to get this change. Obviously, well, I don't think it would be a decade, but yeah, I think it's key to see, I think, the Russian response, because Russia is very much playing the calculated game here. They think the opposition is sort of pro-West. Obviously, we don't know if the opposition candidate, and
yeah,
I'm forgetting her name off the top of my head right now, which is not a good thing. But we don't know what she overall thinks of Russia. But I think Putin obviously doesn't want to get dogged like he was in
yeah,
Ukraine, thinking the pro-Russian segments will always lead way when they can, inevitably. As we saw in Ukraine, the pro-Russian segment was outnumbered inevitably by the areas of the country itself that wanted more integration with Europe. So I think it's important. I think Lukashenko obviously is delaying, I think, the inevitable. And my personal view, and I don't like to give personal views, is I think Putin will see the moment when it's time to dump him and do fit. I think Russia has too much to lose by sticking around with someone who inevitably may just become too much of a poison chalice to stick around. It may just be better for them to dump him and bring up some random nobody that's in Lukashenko's government who no one has heard
yeah.
of, and basically say, I'm the reformer when I'm really not, but I'm not, cruel, and I actually will do quote unquote free elections, but in reality is more, reserving the Russian hand of things.
Yeah. And speaking of Russia, an excellent segue right here is we have a recent alleged poisoning of a opposition activist. So, would you like to give a bit of a situation on that?
Yeah. So the activist, just this weekend, so this story has really broken out, is Alexei Nivlev. I apologize if I'm botching the last name. He has been very critical of Putin throughout the years, particularly one of the few opposition leaders who's neither been arrested or be killed. So that's an achievement in Russia, especially with Putin's gang of terror. But yes, he was poisoned this week. He's the leader of Russia Future, a very centrist, party that wants free-ish, views of Russia, free market economics, whatnot. But he was hospitalized with a poison thing. Many believe it was politically motivated. And just today, he was granted release to Germany for medical treatment, as there was a fear by many in the Russian opposition sector that he would die in Russia because, quote unquote, the Russian government would make sure of it. Obviously, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but there has been evidence over the years that Vladimir Putin kills his opposition leaders like it's a holiday sport, because Putin, when he sees someone who's a threat, wants to get rid of them rather fast. I think, others have been poisoned throughout the year.
Yeah. I'll just give some notes. There was an anti-government activist called Versalov, poisoned in 2018. So another recent example. Another famous journalist and anti-government activist was poisoned once in 2015, where I believe they were treated in Moscow. I believe this is the individual, may have been the other, and they were brought back to health. And then they were poisoned once again in 2017 and is now in a medical coma. And this is really the issue, is this current anti-government activist was on a plane and had to make a stop in a city that doesn't really have the healthcare that can support them. So while the Russian government is saying these very nice words about wanting to release and so forth, I think we're past the point of no return for these individuals medically, and that's really the concerning thing, because we have to remember that despite Putin talking about elections or whatever, Russia is not a democracy. It is ultimately, it's still a dictatorship. And, maybe that will be the last dictatorship of Europe. But yeah, that, the opposition is not safe at all in Russia, and so forth. It's really quite inspiring how they're able to stay within Russia and continue their activist work there. It's very brave and yeah, very admiring as well.
It is, and I think they are very much should be admired for their tenacity and risk they do every day. Going against the Tsar, as I like to call Putin. But I think it's obvious the Russian government has no problem doing it. I mean, we've seen it numerous times, especially in Britain. They will go and find people they don't like who have been rather critical and take them out. We've seen it last year in the Salisbury poisoning. No, in 2018 with the Salisbury poisoning. We also saw it in London back in 2007. I'm forgetting the name of the individual, but they poisoned an ex-KGB operative who had gone to the West and was opening his mouth about, Putin. They killed him as well. So obviously the Russian government is very, very selective in how they do this. And the opposition leader this week, to quote the Wall Street Journal back in 2012, is the man Putin fears the most, because he is very good at getting his messaging across. Unlike many other opposition leaders, has not been silenced as easily via that, Western media catching him or having allies of prominent influence. Speaking of protests, we'll mention now Thailand. There is a student protest. It should be noted Thailand has been under a military junta for some years now. And Adam can detail the latest on that. Adam?
Yeah, so I'm just going to go for a bit of the context here. So back in 2014, a military coup seized control of the government there. And now I'll add that Thailand has a particular problem with coups. Since 1932, which I believe was their first, they have had an average of one every 7 years. That isn't particularly good for their stability, but they still keep that, facade of democracy. So the way it traditionally works is that, and I will get how this comes to the protests, but the way it usually works for the military is they will they'll amend the Thai constitution to a way that suits their ability to have power. Now, how this worked in 2014 to a constitution that they amended in 2017 is an election is held, the military traditionally loses, but they're able to keep power some other way. So in this case, it was a 250-member Senate, which had members directly appointed by the military. So despite the fact they lost the House, or they lost their lower chamber, they were able to appoint a government and appoint a prime minister via having a Senate support and some of the support they got in these democratic elections. And it happened in 2019, I believe, when they had their elections, where ultimately they had a majority for a anti-military government, but ultimately they weren't able to be stable enough, and so the military were able to consolidate power once again. So this brings to these student protesters who have a very strong pro-democracy message behind them. So a few days ago, 10,000 students, which is an incredible amount for Thailand, met on, I believe it was Independence Plaza or something like that. A large area in which they were protesting, and they had three main points. One was to call new elections. The second was to get rid of this 2017 constitution, rewrite it, ensure that it is, a pro or just a democratic one, and also to have to get rid of the perceived legality of the military to harass ordinary people. And it definitely is, and just some figment of their imagination. Every time there has sort of been a coup, there has been a repression of the weakest in society to ensure that the military can stay in power. So yeah, a very major movement. 10,000 may not sound like a lot. Some estimates were 15,000 may not sound like a lot, but for a country that has gone, where the military holds such incredible power, there's ultimately going to be some optimism for the future, as hopefully this movement will grow further and further to try and get a more democratic Thailand.
Yeah, no, I can agree. I mean, with that movement, I mean, the current prime minister, really effectively the person in charge, who was part of the coup in 2014, Cha, I'm not going to try and say his full name, but Cha, has very much built a repressive regime to a sense, to make himself a strong man. If I recall correctly, students are supposed to pledge their allegiance to him as well, along with the monarchy. And he's used the monarchy also in a very political way, which it's not supposed to do. But he's very much, I believe, appointed the sister of the monarch to a position in his government.
So this is a big issue with the coups in Thailand. So traditionally, it's seen there are three major ways they can get into power. The first is they're able to retain legitimacy because of the monarchy. And the second is, consolidating power of the middle class, and finally is repression of the lower class. But that key point on the monarchy, where it has an incredibly for as much as we know, based off polling or the way it's shown on the streets, a very popular image, and people support them. We don't know if that's the case, behind the scenes, but ultimately that is how it is. And it's a case where the I think it's Article 112 or something like that, or maybe Article 12 or something of the actual Thai constitution says that it is an illegal offence to insult the monarchy. So yeah, they are able to. The reason these military juntas can stay around is because the king is able to go, I support this. And this has been a tactic of the government to try and, I guess, split these student protests, because some of the protesters have had a very anti-monarchy message. And as far as we know, that is going to be unpopular for some segments of Thai society. And so, they've been trying to really amp up their messaging, ignoring the other, so trying to have this this pro-democracy edge. So yeah, definitely tactics of a dictatorship going on, because that ultimately what it is, besides the flawed elections.
Yes, very flawed elections, and also very much so, the leader in his sense is very much built, the view that, he is the one in charge. And I think the interesting point is, a lot of these coups happen on corruption, allegedly, of course, by the democratically elected governments. I mean, the last democratically elected leader of Thailand was removed via a coup because of alleged corruption allegations. Now, obviously, whether that was actually true or not, we may never know because of the odd nature of Thailand. But yeah, I think it's quite, the pattern repeats itself. It feels like every few years in Thailand where a government gets elected, maybe there's a decade or so of, free government, and then boom, another coup happens. But yeah. It's always quite the thing. And what do you think may overall happen? Do you think these protests may make an impact, or do you think this may just be a passing and this moves on?
I think it's noting this thing we see a lot with politics, which is demographics. Who knows if these student protests inspire other people their age to continue to protest and support democracy. And ultimately, you'll get to a stage where you have far too many people in your country who just can't stand the autocracy, the repression that they're pushed into. So I don't think these protests will be around very long. As I said, their numbers may be large for Thailand, but they aren't enough to change the country. And especially when the military has definitely gone through worse oppressive measures before, this isn't going to stop them. But I think on the next note, we can go a bit more familiar to the UK, where their education system, something that I am currently going through, has seen a bit of fiasco. And I don't know what we're going to be labeling this type of segment, but Peter had the idea of talking about the loser of the week across international politics.
Yes, loser of the week. I'd actually say it's two people, but I'll start off. Apologies for that. I'd say it's two people, but I'll start off with, I think, for the first nominee of the week, and that is Gavin Williamson, the UK Education Secretary, who, after his Scottish colleagues, the Scottish Secretary, mind you, for those who may not be familiar, Britain, because of the devolved government, the different four nations are all devolved on education policy. So Williamson was the final one with England who could prepare for the exams. It should be noted that all three other countries all had fiascos with their exams as well. However, what makes Williamson's case the worst is he was warned in July that this algorithm wasn't going to work. The issue here
just to say something quickly, this algorithm you mentioned. So traditionally, the way exams would work in the UK, like every other exam, you do it, it gets marked. However, what the government, I guess, this independent body had decided to do was create an algorithm which looked at the school's performance. And Gavin Williamson approved this, and I'll hand it back to Peter to continue.
Yes, the algorithm was approved by the group that does the exams. It should be noted, because of coronavirus, the exams that were scheduled to take place in the spring were canceled. And this is where the Ofcom, who does the exams, had to rush. And they did an algorithm. It was looked over, according to the Times, which is a British newspaper, by Williamson and his deputy, Nick Gibbs, once before its rollout. And they thought, okay, nothing will happen. And on the day the announcement was made, there was a very controversial thing in the fact that many students, and I'm sure Adam, can allude to this, and I can allude to this, having talked with many people, who had predicted grades because of teachers, giving them grades, and then the algorithm itself had a completely different view in terms of grade. Mind you, most of the algorithms, changed in grades for lower grades, and for many students, it meant places they had dreamed of going to for university were now out of reach. It should be noted the UK, because of standardization, does their admissions via test A-levels results. And Adam can talk a bit about, how many students in the UK were feeling about that fiasco.
Yeah, so I think, besides trying to bring a bit of light and news by touching upon this story, which seems very silly, there is a big issue behind this as a whole thing. Because ultimately, people who live in very poor areas, go to poor schools, yet are expected to do incredibly well, ultimately had their grades pushed back. And, for say, for example, an immigrant family that, first generation had come here, their child, none of their family before had ever been to university, but this was the first time their child had been able to get there. They were getting A stars in their exams, which is the very best someone can get. And means they're going to get into the top universities, and ultimately they get screwed over. So, besides Gavin Williamson being denoted this loser of the week,
it's one of the losers of the week.
One of the losers of the week. It was a very silly fiasco where the government was U-turning, going, we'll do this and then we'll do that, and then ultimately ended where they said, we'll give, allow the teachers, the ones the teachers predicted people would get, we'll just give them that. So yes, that definitely is a bit of a lighter story for this week, but definitely a very silly one. But
it is.
Would you like to talk about the other loser of the week?
Should note that Williamson, because of this story, is now in very high danger of getting sacked, which is always fun. Now, Adam can mention our co-winner of the loser of the week.
Oh, right. I believe we have two resigning ministers, or are we just going to focus on Canada or Ireland?
Oh, we can do both. It's fine.
Sure,
okay, I'll do Canada,
okay.
And you can do Ireland. It's whatever works for you. So I'll go with our other losers of the week, and that is Canada's Finance Minister, Bill Munro. No, I'm botching it. Apologies. Bill Munro, who was finance minister in the Trudeau government since 2015, and resigned this week over an epic scandal involving the We charity. He had been under pressure for weeks now, and it was rumored that Justin Trudeau had already lost confidence in him to carry out his economic policies, and he inevitably resigned, not just as finance minister, but as an MP as well, which is pretty dramatic resignation statement. And his replacement is, as joked in the Canadian media, the super minister, Christina Freeland, who is now deputy prime minister and minister of finance. And for Mr. Bill Munro, who had a very prominent role in the Liberal government for the last few years, is now out of a job and trying now out of pleasure to take the ambassadorship to the OCED. That is just quite big of a fall. And then Adam has the other loser of the week from Ireland.
Yes, so obviously the coronavirus has created a situation which, people feel like they've been put into situations, lockdown, or whatever term your current country is using. And they feel like, everybody shared this responsibility. But ultimately, in Ireland, it has been revealed that at a parliamentary golf club dinner, which was in violation of these lockdown rules, that two ministers, or I believe a minister and a senator, deputy leader of the upper house, were members or were attending this party. So yes, they've had the agriculture minister has to resign, this deputy leaders have to resign, and it's definitely made people question what this was all about if the elite gets this whole different rule book to them.
Exactly, and that's never a good thing as a politician if you're breaking your own rules that you tell people to do. Just a correction, it was Morneau is the Canada's finance minister, just to correct notes there. But yes, those are our losers of the week. This is a new segment we are displaying now at the end of the show for some lightheartedness, because the world's always better when there's some humor. But yes,
especially when you're talking through the truly awful subjects of terrorism, corruption, coups. It's probably good to highlight some of the gaffes that are around at the moment.
Yes, indeed, and we again thank you all for watching our second episode. We hope that you come again next week where we discuss more news that comes around. And it's always a pleasure to be with Adam at night. And you can catch us 5 p.m. Eastern U.S. Standard Time or 10 p.m. UK time. Again, from me and Adam, good night.
Bye.